Part 1. For several silent minutes the police officer had stood looking down at the body of the young girl. Like the blonde, she too had been a pretty girl, with long dark brown hair. A gold necklace with a heart-shaped medallion was still around her neck, the chain broken and partially embedded in one of her wounds. She still wore blue hoop earrings, and there were rings on 2 of her fingers. It appeared she had been gagged with her own blouse, and her hands tied behind her with what was probably a strip of cloth torn from a towel. Lividity had already begun, and after trying to bend one of her toes, the officer decided she had been dead for quite some time. Ants and pill bugs were crawling over her blood-stained torso, and flies had already laid their eggs in her nasal cavities. Soon he knew maggots would be hatching. Her eyes remained partially open, a milky gray glaze replacing their original color. The lifeless stare of a murder victim seemed always to draw the officer's attention. The eyes were like once sparkling marbles deprived of light, dull, non-reactive, cold. He shook his head slightly, images of her killer forming in his mind. "God, if only I could see through your eyes," he whispered. Still, the officer's expression did not change in the slightest. Years of investigating homicides had taught him to mask any feelings he might have. To do the job he knew the situation demanded, he had to go about his duties with an attitude some might mistake for a total lack of emotion. Fellow officers, in fact, had often remarked that they had never known anyone less bothered by the sight of a homicide victim. Jokingly, they said that he would get right down there with them, touching them, looking right at them, like he was checking a dog for fleas. Nothing seemed to affect the guy. It was the only way the officer knew to properly conduct an investigation. While he stood there looking down at the girl's body, his hands buried in the hip pockets of his trousers, the captain walked up and placed a hand on his shoulder. Neither spoke for a moment. Then the captain shook his head. "I've seen some rough ones, but never anything like this," he said. "Nothing like what they did to these poor kids. Bastards didn't leave them a shred of dignity. Not a bit. I think that's what bothers me the most." There were tears in his eyes as he spoke. "It bothers me too, Captain," the officer said. He took a deep breath. "It bothers me a hell of a lot."